Hello, everyone. So tonight I am going to read some more stories from the book that I own called Haunted Canada. So I'm going to read some of those, and then afterwards I'm going to show a short clip. It's actually an animated, true scary story. It's pretty cool. It's like 3 minutes long. So I'll read a couple of these, and then we'll watch that. All right, here we go. This one's called Mary Rutherford's Grave, Hanover, Ontario. It's a sad story, the story of Mary Rutherford, and scary too. It may not be true, but that doesn't stop people from telling it, because it might be true. No one knows how or why it began, but over the years, its strands have been woven into a spine-tingling tale that can still send a group of teenagers, usually boys, scrambling out of the cemetery as fast as their Nikes can carry them. The cemetery they run from is an old one in West Benedict, near Hanover, Ontario. It's where Mary Rutherford's grave is supposed to be, off by itself on a hill toward the back of the property. But the inscription on the solitary headstone says that Isabel, not Mary Rutherford, was buried there in 1872, when she was 72 years old. Further research shows that Isabel married happily and had children and grandchildren. Would there be any reason for her ghost to be haunting the spot? Not likely. But what if Mary Rutherford really is buried on this hill? But what if Mary Rutherford really is buried on the hill? The spirit of someone who suffered as she did might very well linger in the area. Mary Rutherford is said to have died when she was still in her 30s, long after her friends had married and settled down to a happy life raising a family. She finally met the man of her dreams. Thrilled, she planned her wedding, but when the big day arrived, she was left standing alone before the preacher. Her bridegroom had skipped town the night before. Overcome by shame and heartbreak and still wearing her wedding dress, Mary hanged herself. Even though her death was a suicide, she was buried in the cemetery, but off by herself on a hill, wearing her wedding dress and lying face down in her coffin. Her spirit, though couldn't find peace, and her ghost, perhaps still waiting for her lover, appears there to this day. This is a story that, every now and then, draws a small group of young people to the graveyard late at night. One of them issues a "I dare you" challenge, and off they go. What's there to be afraid of? After all, the name on the gravestone they're going to spend time near says Isabella, not Mary. So the young buried bride story can't possibly be true, can it? Or can it be? But when they reach their spooky destination under the cover of darkness, only the bravest among them dares to touch the headstone, defying the claim that if you do, you'll break a bone in the future. And if they see it, the wispy glow that appears on the side of the hill, or the shadowy shimmering figure of a woman moving through the trees, their bravery slips away, and so do they, back to the safety of their homes. Every now and then, a few weeks later, if one of them breaks an arm or a leg or even just a big toe, they all remember the night spent at the graveyard, checking out the tragic tale of Mary Rutherford. This next one is from Prince Edward Island, and this one's called The Coffin Came Back. Like the Mary Rutherford story, the tale of Charles Coughlin's coffin is creepy, suggesting some supernatural force at work. How else could the casket containing Coughlin's body drift out of the way from the Gulf of Mexico and end up 8 years after his death in Prince Edward Island, a place he had said he would never return to? The story has been around since the early 20th century. It began in an early Ripley's Believe It or Not column and was featured in the first Believe It or Not book, Robert Ripley, published in 1929. After that, it spread around the world and eventually became one of Ripley's most famous and popular reports of incredible events. At its core, Coughlin's story is a familiar one. A young man born in the 1840s in an isolated farming community, in this case, the Prince Edward Island, has a dream. He wants to become an actor. His father warns him that if he leaves to follow his dream, he'll never be welcomed back by his family. He leaves anyway, vowing never to return to his birthplace. He becomes a successful actor in England and eventually ends up performing in the United States with a touring company. On November 27, 1899, while appearing in a play in Galveston, Texas, he drops dead on stage and is buried in a local cemetery. In September 1900, a powerful hurricane hits Galveston Island and surging waters unearth his coffin and wash it out to sea. Over the next 8 years, currents carried out of the Gulf of Mexico, around the southern tip of Florida, up the Atlantic, around Nova Scotia, and into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where it finally washes ashore on Prince Edward Island. A metal plate found inside the casket is Coughlin's name on it. The young man with a dream has finally come home. Folklore researchers at the University of Prince Edward Island say the story is a myth, and they're probably right. Coffin wasn't laid to rest in PEI, and he wasn't born there. Some sources state that he was born in Paris, France in 1841, but he grew up in Ireland and was known as an Irish actor. He did spend some time in PEI. While touring the United States in the late 1800s, he visited the island and liked it so much he rented an old farmhouse at Abel's Cape near the Fortune River and lived in it for over a few years. Coughlin did pass away in Galveston on November 27, 1899, but he didn't die on stage. He had been sick for a few weeks by then, and an understudy was playing his part that night. Galveston newspapers reported his death, along with his wife's plans to have his body taken by train to New York to be cremated, but that's where the case goes cold. Years later, a fire destroyed the records at the funeral home that had held onto his remains until his wife had finished making arrangements to move the body. So it looks as though no one will ever know for certain exactly what did happen to Coughlin's coffin. Maybe that's why some people still want to believe that it eventually carried Charles Coughlin, actor, back to his beauty and peace of Prince Edward Island. Okay, this one's in Regina, Saskatchewan, and it's called Murder Most Foul. Occasionally, security monitors at 1925 Victoria Avenue in downtown Regina, Saskatchewan, indicate that someone is moving around on the third floor, even though there's no one up there, at least not anyone alive. For some people who work in the building, the fact that a monitor can detect a mysterious movement is proof that they weren't just imagining things when they saw the young woman with glowing red hair drifting through the third floor rooms. They figure she's also the one who turns the lights on and off up there. There's a restaurant on the main floor of 1925 Victoria now, but the whole building used to be a home to a posh private men's club called the Asaboya Club. The fine old building has been completely renovated, so the club now occupies just the top 2 floors. There are female members of the club now too, the rules banning them from dropping in 1988. But decades ago, when women weren't even supposed to enter the building, some young ladies did get in, slipping in through a side door and up the stairs to private rooms on the 3rd floor. Members in town on business could stay in those rooms overnight instead of checking into a hotel at the end of a long working day. My dog's sleeping and he's having a dream. That's what you hear. It's cute. Okay, it is said that the ghost who haunts Asaboya Club was one of those young women. The story explaining her lingering presence tells of her coming often to visit one particular member. Over time, she fell in love with him. When she let him know how she felt, he told her he didn't want to have anything more to do with her, but she didn't want to stop seeing him. Some say the man was afraid she would cause him all sorts of trouble. Whatever the reason, he's supposed to have arranged to have her murdered at the club. After she was axed to death, her lover and a few other members organized the removal and disposal of her body. But not even death could keep her away from the club. For more than half a century, she has been returning to the 3rd floor. But why? Is she reaching out across time seeking revenge or justice, or is she looking for a love lost so long ago? That's disgusting. Yuck. This one's called The Lady Vanishes, and this one's in Kingston, Ontario, which is very close to me, actually. A ruthless boyfriend is also said to be behind the gruesome death of a young woman whose presence haunts the 300 block of King Street East in historic downtown Kingston, Ontario. Unlike the anonymous member of the Asaboya Club, this fellow has a name, John Napier. According to one of the best-known tales of haunting in the Kingston area, back in 1868, Napier had a girlfriend named Teresa Beam. One night, he arranged a secret rendezvous with her in a laneway off King Street. But when the couple met, instead of sharing hugs and kisses, they got into a terrible fight that ended with Napier strangling Teresa with his bare hands. Then, to hide his crime, he buried her body nearby, or so the story goes. Over the years, people have reported seeing a short, attractive woman in a long, black, old-fashioned dress moving mysteriously around the neighborhood. When anyone tries to speak to her, she vanishes. And in the 1970s, a photographer who was renting a studio at 348 King Street East was so bothered by spooky knocks, usually 3 in a row, that he had his assistant finally use a Ouija board to try and find out what was going on. They claimed to have connected with Teresa's spirit and learned that she was the source of the strange noises. The spirit also led them to believe that her remains were buried in the basement and that she had been restless ever since her death because she wasn't buried in holy ground. Another tenant was also bothered by unexplained knocks and noises and, familiar with the photographer's story, had the cellar floor dug up, but found no buried bones. When more work was done on the basement a few years later, a construction crew uncovered a boarded up passageway leading next door to 350 King. Maybe Beam's body is buried in that cellar. After all, the buildings are connected. But digging up a basement is an expensive project, and most people, including the owners of 350 King, don't want to spend a lot of money chasing a ghost. So neither Teresa Beam's remains nor her story have been put to rest yet. All right, I'll read one more and then I'll show you that little short clip. Ouija, the talking board. In 1980, when trying to make contact with the spirit world was quite the fad, Elijah Bond of Baltimore, Maryland, invented an alphabetical covered board that he claimed would give an intelligent answer to any question. The board came with a pointer on little legs. When players lightly rested their fingers on it, it was supposed to answer questions by sliding to the words yes or no, and to the letters that would spell out names and other words. Bond and two partners formed the Kenner Novelty Company, called the invention the Ouija Board, a combination of the French and German words for yes, and started marketing it as a parlor game. The board was a hit. In 1901, William Fuld took over the company, and he and then his children mass-produced Ouija boards until Parker Brothers bought them out in 1966. Parker Brothers and several other companies are still selling Ouija boards today. There are still some people who believe the boards can answer their questions and help them connect to the spirits of people who've died. They might change their minds, though, if they tried using the board blindfolded with someone else writing down the letters the pointer moves to. When they take the blindfolds off, they might be surprised to see the nonsense words that Ouija board has come up with. It might leave them wondering if it's just a game. That's all it is, isn't it? I myself would never use one, and I highly suggest you don't do that either. Okay, I'm going to read one more. This goes with it, I think. Yeah, it does. Okay, it's a short one. This one's called School Spirit, and this one's in Edmonton, Alberta. A Ouija board may be just a game, but Ron Hadley believed it helped him make sense of the weird experiences he had to put up with while working as caretaker at the Edmonton Public Schools Archives and Museum in 1980s. The museum is located in the old McKay Avenue School, in a part of Edmonton that dates back to the city's early days. And for many years, Hadley and others have felt that spirits from the past were still present in the museum. How else to explain things like voices in empty rooms, locked doors being unlocked by invisible hands, pictures being taken down from walls, and blinds being ripped off windows? Hadley turned to a Ouija board for an answer. In an article he wrote for an Edmonton newspaper, Hadley said that the spirit of a construction worker named Peter was haunting the building. He had fallen to his death while working on an addition to the school site back in 1912. But how could Peter have told him all this through a game board? Maybe that's the question someone should ask the Ouija board. The school is massive. Alrighty. Now I'm going to show you this clip.
This happened when I was 17 years old. I would go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week and ride the bus home. It was a Sunday and I had just missed my bus, so I had to wait longer for another one. I went there, but they were out for the evening, and taxis charged more, so I decided to sit and wait in the bus shelter. It was a cold night and snow had just started peppering the ground. My bus was taking longer than usual, so I got my phone out and listened to some music. Almost an hour had passed. It was freezing and I hadn't seen anyone at all. That was until I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a creepy guy dressed in thick layers of clothing, walking slowly towards me. I knew staring at attention, so I just focused on my down to the shelter and just stared at me. There was something off about him. He seemed like he was either drunk or on drugs. He then asked,
"When is the bus due?"
I took out my earphones and said, "I think it's delayed because of the snow." He stared at me for a while, then started mumbling to himself. He was really starting to creep me out, so I pretended to be on my phone. After a couple of minutes, I took another look. He'd moved closer to me. I looked away for a second, then heard the sound of him sliding even closer. I turned to him and said, "You okay there?" He stared at me with glossy eyes, lifted his arm, and leaned towards me. Immediately, I grabbed my bag and ran as he fell to the ground. I ran down the road, trying my hardest not to look back. I kept going until I got to the next bus stop. I turned around to check to see if he was there. He was gone, so I went to sit down. Feeling relieved, I rested my head on the back of the glass and waited for the bus. I jolted and turned around to see the same guy staring at me through the glass.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Then he started walking around the shelter towards me.
I'm warning you, stay back.
I yelled in panic as I was backing up. I wanted to run, but I left my bag in the shelter and I couldn't leave without it. Suddenly, the man leaped at me and I quickly moved out of the way. He fell to the ground face first. I froze in shock, then noticed the blood coming from his face. I tried to get a response out of him, but nothing worked. I called the police and paramedics and they arrived shortly after. I told them what had happened and they told me that the guy was on prescription drugs. They found a photo in his wallet of him and his son. The boy looked just like me, so he assumed he thought I was him. I later learned that he had lost his son in a custody battle and went off the rails. He was taken away for treatment, and that was the last I saw of him. I got my driver's license shortly after, and have never been on a bus since.
That's actually more sad than anything. I do enjoy watching them, though, these animated ones. I think they're really cool looking. So anyways, I hope you guys, I just want to do something kind of quick but different tonight. This month is Halloween, and I did say I'm going to put out something every day, so I really want to get back to that. Hope you guys enjoy. And I will talk to you guys down in the comments. Bye.